His neighbors laughed at what he'd built, but then wished they'd done the same. Manu lived in Texas, and unfortunately, he was expecting a huge hurricane, so he drove to Louisiana to buy a dam from a company specializing in flood parts. When he got home, he had to install it himself. In fact, the dam arrived in parts, and this was the first time that the company had sold a dam in parts to a private individual so that he could build a dam around his house. So Manu worked day and night with his own hands for 6 months to protect his house from flooding. As he did so, his neighbors looked at him strangely, and he told them it was nothing, and that the hurricane would pass as always, but that it wouldn't destroy their home, because, to tell the truth, they were used to dealing with it without it being a real danger to them. But Manu wasn't interested in their palaver and continued building his dam. And when the hurricane came, you'll never imagine the damage it caused. Press the plus button to see part 2. This man disappears after swimming in this cave, but 3 years later the police find him. And what he has become will terrify you. Mark loved diving, but what he didn't know was that his passion would turn his life into a real nightmare. At first, Mark only swam in protected areas, but one day, he decided to explore a cave that was off limits to the public. His friends warned him about the dangers, but Mark was determined to go anyway. That decision was a huge mistake. Mark dove in, but he never came back to the surface. After a few days, he still hadn't returned home, and his car was still parked in the same spot. The police then began searching for him, but his body was nowhere to be found. But one day, Mark's parents received a call from the police. They had found Mark, but he wasn't the same man anymore. He had become terrifying, and what he claimed to have experienced in that cave was just horrifying. Tap the plus and comment "dive" if you want part 2.
A pregnant sheep is about to give birth, but what the vet discovers shocks the entire world. Bella, a 3-year-old sheep, was found tied up in a field by Laura, a veterinarian. Bella was in an advanced stage of pregnancy, ready to lamb at any moment. However, after Laura brought her to the clinic, days went by with no sign of the lamb arriving, and Bella's condition worsened each day. Her belly kept growing and growing non-stop. It looked like she was going to burst at any moment. Laura was deeply concerned about Bella, as she had never seen anything like this in her entire career. Feeling that something was very wrong, she decided to do an ultrasound to investigate further. When she discovered what the sheep had inside her belly, she couldn't believe her eyes. Bella wasn't pregnant with a lamb. It was something horrifying. What Bella had inside her was much worse than anything in the world. Click the follow button and comment "strange sheep" if you want to find out what happens in part 2.
He adopted 3 abandoned black girls, and what they did 20 years later to thank him is incredible. Thomas, a dedicated police officer and recent widower, led a quiet life. On his way home from work one day, Thomas made a decision that would change his life forever. He came across 3 little girls, sisters of African descent, abandoned and terrified, wandering near a local park. Without hesitation, Thomas decided to take them into his home, thus beginning a new chapter in his life. It was a difficult adjustment, but Thomas, with patience and dedication, taught them not only to read and write, but also to laugh and love again. As the years passed, the bond between Thomas and the girls, whom he had named Maya, Lila, and Zoe, grew stronger with unconditional love. But what these 3 sisters did 20 years later to thank the man who had saved them is beyond imagination, and you're in for a real shock. Press the plus button for part 2.
Left his wife after she gave birth to a black baby. Then DNA results showed something terrifying. Mark and Jenna were a married couple, and not long after their wedding, Jenna became pregnant. 9 months later, the day had come for their child to be born. "Jenna, you can do it," Mark said, holding his wife's hand at the entrance of the delivery room. Time passed and he heard the cry of the baby. The baby was initially obscured by the doctor holding something. As the doctor approached Mark with the baby in arms, Mark took a deep breath. His brow furrowed immediately, and he unconsciously stepped back in shock, for what Mark saw was a black baby in the doctor's arms. He felt betrayed and hurt by Jenna. "What's going on, Jenna?" he demanded. "You don't know what's happening," Mark said angrily. Both of them were white, but their child was black. Realizing something, Mark left Jenna in the hospital alone. However, when the family turned to DNA testing, the results stunned everyone. Follow me as I unveil this secret.